Professor Hauerwas, thank you very much for agreeing to speak with us today and to speak about themes which relate to our conference on prenatal testing, disability, and the ethical society. So we have a number of questions today which relate to prenatal testing, disability, and theology, and which tie into some of the themes of the conference. But first, I wanted to start off by asking a broader question before getting into more specific ones. I was wondering if you could tell us how you became interested, what interested you initially in looking at disability in theology?
Interest is too weak a word. I was at the University of Notre Dame, and I was in a committee meeting with a young biologist named Harvey Bender, and he was involved with Logan Center, which was across the street from Notre Dame, which was a center committed to caring for mentally disabled people because there was no good state support for them. And Harvey was on the board, and he said that I should be interested in what Logan Center was doing. So I was pulled into their life in a way that made me see that the care of these people was a challenge to some of the more basic convictions of our society. And I admired and learned much from parents' commitment to care for their children and to see that their children got the kind of care that was crucial for them to survive and be loved and cared for. I tell the story, it's true, when I first went to Logan Center, I had not been around mentally disabled people. And of course, one of the things about Down syndrome folks is they don't observe our spacing protocols in relationship to one another. And I had a boy, must have been about 6 or 7, run up as I was being toured around Logan and put his arms around me and got right in my face. And of course, I had to pretend that this was just great, but he was scaring the hell out of me because I didn't know, I hadn't been around the mentally disabled. So I didn't know what was going on. And of course, I had to carry him through much of the tour. And I slowly then began to learn how to be with the mentally disabled in a way that didn't make their disability who they were. So that's how I became involved with the disabled. By the way, I worry about that general categorization, disabled. It doesn't tell you much.
Yeah. Thanks very much. That's very interesting to hear the background. I wanted to ask a question now, which relates more specifically to the conference themes, which is on the ethical society. Because I know that you've written on the liberal society and some of the challenges that a liberal society might have in accepting and accommodating disabled people. And so I was wondering if you'd be able to explain more about this maybe explain what you mean by a liberal society, and also why a liberal society might have difficulties in accommodating disabled people, perhaps especially people with intellectual disabilities.
Liberal society are determined by the presumption that we have to make our lives ours by making sure that we are not dependent upon other people, but only on our own wills, and that therefore social cooperation requires that we enter into agreements with one another that presume that we are each rational beings in a manner that can look after our own self-interest. The problem with the mentally disabled is we do not think that they're rational, and therefore they require care in a way that is extraordinary and above our usual obligations to one another. And my way of putting that is modernity names the times when you should have no story except the story you chose when you had no story. And that's the fundamental commitment to our own individuation in relationship to other people. And we think the mentally disabled can't do that. And therefore, it's a matter of supererogation that we take care of the mentally disabled at all. Notice what this does to language. The language of fetus is a deeply liberal language because it's a child. Now, how you therefore use descriptions reflects a political reality that can be extremely destructive. So liberal societies care for the disabled, but do so with a good deal of reservation. Partly connected with that is the whole issue of suffering. And we think that we need to be people who are fundamentally free of suffering. And since the assumption is that the mentally disabled suffer from being mentally disabled, it is better that they not exist. So there is in the commitment of a liberal society to keep suffering as far away from our lives as we can, a disposition to avoid having the mentally disabled among us at all, because we think they suffer from being mentally disabled. What they suffer from is our presumption of how we would feel if we were mentally disabled. So the mentally disabled suffer from our prejudice against them, not from being mentally disabled.
Stan, you have called prenatal testing a search and destroy mission. What are people trying to destroy, actually, at that point? Is it the child? Is it suffering as you described? Is it the parent's burden? Or are we frightened about something that we're trying to destroy?
I think it's our presumed deep humanism that creates search and destroy mission, and in the sense that it is better not to exist than to exist as someone that is mentally disabled, and that therefore we are doing a humane thing by prenatal testing. It's interesting if you ask yourself, why do you need prenatal testing? Why do you get it to begin with? The only therapeutic reason is if the child presents as PKU, by changing the diet of the mother, you can significantly affect the extent of the handicap that the child may have. But what good does it do if it turns out that the child is Down syndrome? You're not going to be able to do much. So why do you have prenatal testing at all, other than a very narrow range of conditions? It's very interesting. One of the first tests of prenatal testing was at Yale when I was there as a student, and the people had the test run because they were committed to having a child that could get into Yale, and men stood a better chance. So if the child was a female, they would have it aborted. Now, on what grounds was that wrong? So prenatal testing can result in some developments that most people who are vote liberal would find not acceptable.
One of the concerns that people have, or one of the concerns they may have about the possibility of having a child with disabilities, is time. Some children, some people take more time, as well as effort and expense and limitations to career and so on. But we live in a world that's very much driven by speed and efficiency. What can we learn about time in relationships with people with disabilities?
If you want to speed up your life, don't have a child, period. Because just any child is going to take up time. In fact, it's not that they just take up time, they constitute time. Because how do you know what time is except by the ongoing duration of one thing after another? Time is the ontological condition for producing people of patience. And if you don't have patience, you're not going to be very happy with the child you have. It's going to take a lot of training in patience, both on the part of the parent and on the part of the child. So patience is a constituent of timefulness that is crucial for our being people that have the time to love one another. Because love is also a constituency of our lives, make our lives timeful with one another.
Thanks. So let's extend that a little bit. If we think about a pregnant woman who's just had a test and a prenatal diagnosis that she will or is likely to have a child with disabilities, maybe Down syndrome. So she is scared and in shock. She hasn't thought about this as an ethical issue before. It hasn't come up. She's worried she won't be able to have the time or give up the work or her career or cope the cost and the stigma and having less time for other children or being blamed for making the wrong decision. So the medical staff will give her the test results and present her with options. What should be happening at this point? What other resources will she need and from whom?
I think men are absolute shits in this kind of context, and that what she needs is a refusal by her partner to abandon her and to say, we will do this together. If her partner is not present, she needs friends. She needs friends even if the partner is present.
Right.
To say, I won't leave you alone. Because one of the things that people feel when confronted by this kind of situation is being so alone. So one of the things that I recommended is that a woman in this circumstance needs so desperately is to talk to someone else who has been through it and has learned how to care and be with that child that is mentally handicapped. So that at least offers a possibility of understanding that this isn't the end of the world. It may be the beginning of the world. That comes through the sharing of lives that have faced the having of such a child in a way that isn't just the creation of an isolation that otherwise is so destructive.
So I'm looking here for, well, what can the church do for someone in or out of inside a congregation or someone who's known who doesn't have the money or the resources? Try and find a friend, which is good. Does the church have any other responsibility?
One would certainly hope so, and that is, first of all, that the person that is discovered through prenatal testing that she's carrying a child that may have peculiar challenges. One of the things that would be extremely helpful is the fact that such a child already exists in the congregation. They do not reject the child simply because the child at certain times may shout out or may run around the chancel. So the fact that Christians have learned to live with people who are different, it's a condition for helping us know what to say to one another and be with one another in these circumstances.
Right. In the UK right now, and in relation to the Heidi Crowter case, there are questions about the law about abortion or issues of disability, it's legal for someone to have an abortion here right up to the moment of birth. Do you think that the legal discourse is the place to be working something like this out, or are there other conversations we need to be having?
Murder is murder. I mean, if you have an abortion right up to the time of the delivery, I don't know why you don't call that murder. Child is a living human being. I think these kinds of developments is an indication of social orders gone crazy. The Canadian developments of recent times about doctor-assisted euthanasia, I think it is extraordinarily dangerous. I just wonder, one of the crucial developments for any society capable of caring for children is the presumption that we have children because we think we have something worthy to pass on to future generations. If you lose that, then why are you having children? Well, they're fun, really. They are a manifestation of our love for one another. And what happens if your love changes? You're stuck with them. So I think those kinds of developments may call into question fundamental reasons that we're having children to begin with. And that is a very scary development.
So legal restrictions or permissions of abortion sort of stand on one side. You're talking about why we're even having children, or why some people even have children to begin with.
Right.
Can you think of ways that an ethical society or the church, Christians, might help each other at the why would we have children anyway end of things?
Well, I think you begin with it ought to be a topic for counseling people who want to be married in the church. That's become something that is thought to be private. You don't explore. I think you explore. The Catholics have been right about this. And, that should continue to be something we learn from them about how to understand.
So some people would narrate this as a matter of rights. A woman has a right and to make decisions for herself. It's appropriate for doctors to give information from testing to then enable someone to use their right to make a decision. Would speaking of responsibilities be better, or what kind of language do you think would work better?
I say America is the only country founded on a philosophical mistake, namely the notion of inalienable rights. I think those are null cases most of the time. It is rights are appropriate insofar as they're relative to duties that we have. But an inalienable right is a right that presupposes that I don't have a corresponding duty. So I think a right is appropriate if, as a matter of fact, it's characteristic of a set of practices that we hold up for us to be able to fulfill the duties that are present, but oftentimes not articulated.
Thanks. Do you want to ask the next question?
Sure. We've covered many different topics that relate to disability, theology, and ethics. And we've talked about broad themes like having children. But some people might think that disability is quite a niche topic or a marginal topic, or a topic that's an issue of justice or rights for a relatively small group of people, disabled people. So I was curious to hear your thoughts about this. Do you think that disability in theology or in ethics is a small topic, or do you think it's a broad topic? And how important is it is it important for everyone as well to think about?
I must admit, I'm somewhat doubtful of the development of a whole area in theology called disability studies, because that's to create a ghetto that I think turns the whole thing into an academic subject that much good may be able to be said there as an academic subject. But we don't want to forget this involves real people. And it depends on also what you take disability to be. I used to I'm sorry, I can't take it now. I'm sorry. I used to say to my introductory class to attend to the person walking across the beach saying that they face the existential challenges of their life and they're going to go to their physician to do something about what's always determined the limits of their life, namely that they're bald. And now, what produces the presumption that baldness is an illness? What produces the presumption that aging is an illness, and legitimates medical intervention? I worry a bit about the presumption of disability as the presumption that we can know what the disability is as a way to medicalize it and eliminate the problem. If you have pneumonia, you can intervene and do something about it. So you care for certain kinds of illnesses, cancer, and so on, where you can care for the illness without losing who the patient is. If you start thinking that you want to eliminate handicaps, mentally handicaps, you can't eliminate mentally handicaps without eliminating the person who is mentally handicapped. So one of my worries about disabilities as a wide subject is that it can underwrite a kind of medicalization of our lives that can be quite dangerous. It doesn't mean that you don't want people that think deeply about these matters. And I mean, the kind of work that Brian Brock is doing and so on is absolutely crucial, but it's part of a wider set of concerns.
Thank you. That's really interesting to hear about the broader direction that we can take thinking about disability. Did you have any further questions?
No.
I think we've come to the end of our time. Unfortunately, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and thank you very much.